Sign it. Today. Trevor slid the legal document across the table like it was nothing. Like it was just a piece of paper, and not my entire future sitting on that polished wood surface. I looked up at him. My brother. The man who had barely stepped foot in our father's office for the last 3 years while I ran everything. He was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, wearing a smile that made my stomach turn. My mother sat beside him with her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look at me. She looked at Trevor the way she always had, like he was a king waiting to be crowned. Our lawyer, Mr. Adkins, cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. He looked uncomfortable. He had every reason to be. "This is what Dad would have wanted," Trevor said. "You were never the one meant to run anything." The room felt like it was shrinking around me. My name is Alicia Ward. I am 31 years old. And that afternoon, at the reading of my father's will, my brother demanded every single cent of my inheritance. What he didn't know was that I had been waiting for exactly this moment. Growing up, Trevor was the child my parents showed off. He was the one they talked about at dinner parties, the one relatives praised at Christmas, and the one whose teachers were always described as too hard on him. No matter what Trevor did, there was an excuse waiting just behind it. If he broke something in the house, I had bumped into him first. If he failed a test, the teacher had it out for him. If I succeeded at something, it was simply expected. I was 2 years younger, but I had felt invisible for most of my life. The strange thing was I had gotten used to it. I stopped expecting fairness a long time ago. I focused on school, on work, on being useful. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed to feel like I mattered somewhere. The one person who ever made me feel that way was my father. Dad didn't praise me loudly the way he praised Trevor. But he watched. He noticed things. He trusted me with tasks he never handed to my brother. That quiet trust would later become the most important thing between us. My father, Harold Ward, built his logistics company from the ground up. He started with 2 delivery trucks and a small warehouse on the edge of town. By the time I was a teenager, Ward Logistics had 12 vehicles, a staff of 30, and contracts with several regional suppliers. Dad had built it through early mornings, careful decisions, and real hard work. Trevor loved telling people he was going to inherit it one day. But Trevor rarely showed up. He would come in late, leave early, and spend most of his time on his phone in the break room. Dad covered for him. I never fully understood why. When Dad's health started declining 3 years ago, everything changed. He had a heart condition that worsened every few months. He couldn't manage daily operations the way he used to, so I stepped in. I took over the books, met with clients, handled supplier disputes, and made sure payroll was never late. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for extra pay. I did it because I loved my father and I wasn't going to let his life's work fall apart while he was still alive. That was when I found the first strange number. I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday evening and I was finishing the quarterly financial report when I noticed a line item that didn't match any invoice I could find. It was a loan repayment. Small. Just under $3,000. But I had no record of any loan for that amount. I searched the filing cabinet. Nothing. I checked the digital records. Nothing. So I dug deeper. I pulled every financial document from the past 2 years. Bank statements, expense reports, signed contracts. The more I looked, the more I found. There were payments going out regularly to 3 different lenders. Each one had a loan agreement attached to it. The agreements were signed by my father. But something bothered me about those signatures. They were close, but they weren't right. The pen pressure was wrong. The curve on the capital H in Harold was slightly different from the ones I had watched Dad sign himself. I sat at that desk for a long time, staring at the paper spread across the surface. Only one other person had access to those records besides my father, Trevor. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I came in early and pulled everything I could find. I traced every loan back to its source, every payment back to its account. I built a spreadsheet. I wrote down every number carefully. The first loan was for $75,000, taken out 18 months earlier. The second was for $120,000, taken out 11 months ago. The third, the most recent one, was for $210,000. When I added them together, I had to read the number twice. $400,000. That was the total amount borrowed against the business. Against my father's name. Against his assets and reputation. From everything I could trace, Trevor had taken that money. Not for the business. There were no corresponding equipment purchases, no upgrades, no new contracts linked to the funds. The money had been transferred into a private account, and then withdrawn in separate pieces over time. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. My brother had borrowed $400,000 using our father's name, and buried it inside the company's liabilities. I felt completely sick. I went to my father that same evening. He was sitting in his armchair by the window when I arrived at his house. He looked tired. He always looked tired those days. But when I placed the documents on the small table beside him, something shifted in his expression. He studied the papers for a long time without speaking. I sat across from him and waited. My heart was pounding. I had rehearsed what I was going to say on the drive over. But in that moment, every word I had prepared disappeared. Finally, my father looked up at me. "I know," he said quietly. Those 2 words stopped everything. He had known. He had already found out. He had been sitting with this information for months, carrying the full weight of it alone, and saying nothing to anyone. I asked him why. Why hadn't he confronted Trevor? Why hadn't he reported it? Dad closed his eyes slowly. "If I expose him," he said, "this family will never recover. And nobody will believe you when I'm gone." It was the most honest thing he had ever said directly to me. Dad called Mr. Atkins, his estate lawyer, the following week. For the next several weeks I sat quietly in meetings with my father and Mr. Atkins while we carefully rebuilt the structure of the estate. Dad was thorough and deliberate. He understood exactly what he was doing and why. Ward Logistics was kept intact as a single inheritable asset, but everything else was separated cleanly. Dad had property investments and a significant amount of liquid savings that had always been kept separate from the business. Those were quietly moved into a legal structure assigned entirely to me. The debt was handled differently. Mr. Atkins explained that since the loans had been formally documented against the company's liabilities, any person who inherited full ownership of the business would also inherit full legal responsibility for those debts. It was simply how business ownership worked. Dad looked at me across the table when Mr. Atkins finished explaining. Then he said the words I have thought about every single day since. "If Trevor wants the business so badly, let him have it." We told nobody. Not Trevor. Not my mother. Not a single relative. We simply waited. My father passed away 4 months later on a quiet Sunday morning. I was at the hospital when it happened. I had been there most of the weekend. My mother arrived an hour after he passed and spent the next 20 minutes crying in the hallway. Trevor arrived 2 hours later wearing sunglasses even though the sky outside was completely overcast. At the funeral reception, held at my parents' home, Trevor moved through every room like he was already in charge. He hugged relatives with one arm and held a glass of wine in the other. He told our Uncle Raymond that he planned to take Ward Logistics to the next level. He told our cousin Diane that the company was about to see some real leadership for once. He had cried loudly during the service. But the moment the reception started, the grief disappeared completely. I watched him from across the room that afternoon. I didn't feel angry. I had already moved through anger weeks earlier, sitting quietly in Mr. Atkins' office while the estate documents were being restructured. I felt something much steadier than anger. I felt completely calm. The will reading was scheduled 2 weeks after the funeral. We gathered at Mr. Atkins' office on a gray Wednesday morning. My mother sat beside Trevor. I sat on the opposite side of the table. 2 of my father's brothers attended as witnesses. Mr. Atkins read through the standard portions first. Small items left to distant relatives. A donation to a local charity my father had quietly supported for years. Then came the main inheritance. Trevor received majority ownership of Ward Logistics, along with the company's equipment, vehicles, and operational accounts. My father had structured it exactly as expected, so Trevor would have no reason to suspect anything unusual. I received the property investments and liquid assets Dad had quietly set aside. 3 rental properties and a portfolio of savings bonds. Clean. Debt-free. Fully mine. Trevor's smile faded the moment Mr. Atkins read out what I had received. He leaned over and whispered something to my mother. She stiffened visibly. Then she looked at me with the familiar expression I had seen my entire life. Disappointment. As though I had done something wrong simply by being in the room. Trevor didn't stay quiet for long. He waited until Mr. Atkins finished reading, then leaned forward and put both hands flat on the table. "That's not fair," he said. His voice was low and tight. Mr. Atkins looked up calmly. "The will reflects your father's wishes, Mr. Ward. Dad wasn't thinking clearly at the end," Trevor said. "Everyone in this family knows that." I said nothing. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Then Trevor reached into the folder he had brought with him and pulled out a document I had never seen before. He slid it across the table toward me. It was a transfer agreement, neatly typed, already prepared before the meeting. It had my name at the top and a signature line at the bottom. He wanted me to sign over my entire inheritance, the properties, the bonds, everything I had received. "You were home while I was building my life," he said. Dad felt guilty about it. This isn't what he truly meant to do. My mother nodded steadily beside him. "You owe this family, Alicia," she said quietly. What happened next was something I had not fully expected. Trevor stood up and began listing every grievance he had ever kept stored against me. He said I had manipulated our father during his final months. He said I had inserted myself into the business to make myself look important. He said I had always been jealous of him and this was my attempt to get even. My mother added to it without hesitation. She said I had been distant for years, that I had never supported the family the way Trevor had, that I was being selfish by holding on to assets that rightfully belonged to the son who had carried the family name. Our Uncle Raymond tried to speak. Trevor talked over him. Mr. Atkins asked them to lower their voices twice. I sat through all of it without saying a single word. I felt the heat in my face. I felt every eye in that room land on me one by one. Part of me wanted to stand up and tell them exactly what those loan documents said, exactly whose signature had been forged. But I didn't. Instead, I reached forward calmly, picked up the pen. I read the transfer document slowly. Every line, every clause, every page. Trevor drummed his fingers on the table. My mother watched me with her lips pressed tightly together. Mr. Atkins sat completely still. When I reached the signature line, I paused for just one moment. Then I signed my name. Trevor let out a long breath like he had been holding it for an hour. He grabbed the document before the ink was even dry. My mother placed her hand on his arm and smiled at him the way she always had, like he had just conquered something important. I placed the pen down carefully. "Congratulations," I said. "You now own everything." Trevor laughed. It was a short, satisfied sound. "I always should have." Mr. Atkins looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Concern maybe, or something very close to it. I gave him a small nod. He had sat with us through every quiet meeting over the past several months. He understood exactly what had just happened in that room. Trevor had demanded the inheritance, and I had just given him precisely what he asked for. Trevor organized a celebration dinner that same evening. He called it a family gathering, but everyone in the room understood what it really was. He had booked a private dining room at a restaurant in town and invited nearly a dozen relatives, most of whom had no idea what had taken place at the lawyer's office that morning. I attended. Briefly, Trevor sat at the head of the table and spoke about the future of Ward Logistics. He talked about expansion plans. He talked about new contracts. He talked about honoring our father's legacy, which made my stomach tighten considerably. Relatives congratulated him. Cousins raised their glasses. Our Uncle Raymond patted him on the shoulder and said Dad would have been proud. My mother glowed across the table. I smiled politely whenever someone looked in my direction. I ate quietly and said very little. Before dessert arrived, I excused myself. I said I was tired and that it had been a long day. Trevor barely noticed when I stood up to leave. As I walked to my car in the cool night air, I felt no bitterness, no regret, no lingering sadness. I just felt the quiet, steady weight of knowing exactly what was coming next. 3 days passed. On the morning of the 4th day, my phone rang at 7:30. It was Trevor. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Why are banks calling me?" His voice was high and sharp, exactly the way it got when he was a teenager and something had gone against him. I kept my voice even. What do they want? They're talking about loan repayments. Some outstanding balance on the business accounts. What did you do to me? I walked slowly to my kitchen window and looked out at the garden. Trevor, I said calmly, Ward Logistics is your company now. You own 100% of it. Any questions about the business accounts need to go through the company's accountant. You knew about this, he shouted. You have the company, I replied. You have the accounts. You have the records. Everything is exactly where it has always been. A long pause followed. I could hear him breathing fast on the other end of the line. This isn't over, he finally said. I hope things go smoothly for you, I replied. Then I ended the call. Trevor went to the office the next morning. I found out later from our company accountant, a quiet and reliable man named Mr. Boateng, who had worked loyally with my father for 11 years. He called me that afternoon not to gossip, but because he was a decent man who felt I deserved to know what was unfolding. Trevor had arrived demanding a complete financial report. Mr. Boateng had walked him through everything methodically. The operating accounts, the supplier contracts, the quarterly income figures, and then the liabilities. Mr. Boateng explained the outstanding loan obligations clearly and carefully. 3 separate lenders. Total outstanding debt of $400,000. All of it formally secured against the company's assets as listed in the business records. And since Trevor now owned 100% of Ward Logistics, every single dollar of that debt belonged entirely to him. Mr. Boateng told me that Trevor's face had gone completely white. He had asked Mr. Boateng to repeat the total number. Then he had asked whether there was any legal way to transfer the debt back. Mr. Boateng had explained very politely that the company's liabilities transferred with its ownership, exactly as the assets had. The lenders did not wait. Within a week of Trevor taking formal ownership, the first demand letters arrived at the Ward Logistics office. Each lender had been legally required to hold during the estate proceedings. But now that ownership had been officially transferred and documented, they were ready to collect what they were owed. Trevor called Mr. Atkins immediately. Mr. Atkins told him there was nothing to contest. The loans had been formally documented against the business for over a year. The agreements were legally valid. The collateral was verified. And Trevor had voluntarily signed the inheritance transfer document, which included a clear clause confirming he accepted all company liabilities along with all company assets. Trevor then tried arguing that the original loans had been taken out fraudulently, that the signatures were not his father's. But the lenders had their own copies of everything. The loan agreements, the collateral paperwork, the business registration records. All of it pointed directly to the company. And Trevor was the company now. He hired a financial advisor to search for a way out. The advisor called back 2 days later. There was no easy path forward. The debt was real, it was fully documented, and it was entirely his. My mother called on a Thursday evening. I was making dinner when my phone lit up with her name. I turned down the stove and answered. She didn't say hello. She started speaking immediately. You tricked your brother, she said. Her voice was shaking with barely contained anger. You knew about those debts the whole time and you let him take them. You planned this. I listened until she paused. Then I spoke slowly and carefully. Trevor prepared a transfer document before he even arrived at the lawyer's office, I said. He had it typed and ready in advance. He pressured me in front of witnesses to sign it. I signed it. You should have told him. He told me I owed the family, I said. He told me I was selfish. He said keeping my inheritance was wrong. So I gave it back to him. I gave him everything he asked for. Silence. The business was always going to carry those debts, Mom, I continued. Trevor created them. I didn't put them there. He did. She hung up before I finished the sentence. I turned the stove back up and finished making my dinner. The calls from creditors started coming daily. Trevor tried everything he could think of to escape. He attempted to sell the company vehicles to raise immediate cash, but the lenders had already placed legal liens on the equipment, which meant he couldn't sell anything without first settling the outstanding balances attached to it. He tried to bring in a business partner who might provide extra capital. 2 separate people walked away after reviewing the company's financial records. He approached the bank about refinancing the debt. The bank reviewed the company's debt-to-asset ratio and declined the application. He even contacted a business broker about selling Ward Logistics outright. The broker told him a company carrying $400,000 in secured debt with declining operations would be extremely difficult to sell at any worthwhile price. Every door he knocked on closed in his face. I heard most of this secondhand through Mr. Boateng, through our cousin Diane, and through relatives who didn't fully understand why they were being asked to take sides. I didn't call Trevor. I didn't reach out to my mother. I kept my focus on my own life. And while Trevor scrambled for answers, I quietly began building something new. The lenders launched a formal investigation 3 months after Trevor took ownership. When a borrower cannot repay and disputes the validity of a debt, lenders have the legal right to investigate how the loan originated. Trevor had been telling everyone who would listen that the loans were not legitimate, that the signatures had been forged, that someone else was responsible for the entire mess. He was correct about every single one of those things, but he said it too loudly and too publicly. The investigation confirmed what I had known for over a year. The original loan documents contained signatures that did not match my father's verified records. The accounts where the borrowed money had been deposited were not business accounts. They were traced to a private account opened in my father's name but accessed almost entirely from Trevor's personal devices. The evidence did not point to Trevor as a victim of fraud. It pointed to him as the person who had committed it. The situation moved quickly after that. 2 lenders filed formal complaints. A financial crimes investigator was assigned to the case. Trevor's name began appearing in documents that had nothing to do with inheritance anymore. The family found out piece by piece. It started with our Uncle Raymond, who heard about the investigation through a contact in the local business community. He called me one evening not to accuse me of anything but to ask honest questions. I answered him honestly. I told him what I had found in the accounts before my father passed. I told him about the restructured estate. I told him exactly what Mr. Atkins had helped us do. Raymond was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Harold knew about all of this?" "Yes," I said. "He found out months before he passed." Another long pause. "And he chose not to expose Trevor publicly?" "He chose to let the truth come out on its own," I said. "He just made sure I was protected before it did." Raymond told 2 other family members. Those 2 told others. Within a few weeks the story had moved through every branch of the family. Some relatives were angry at Trevor. Some were angry at my mother for protecting him all these years. A handful were angry at me for not speaking sooner. But for the very first time in my life, the majority of people in my family were looking at me differently. They believed me. Trevor showed up at my apartment on a rainy Tuesday evening. I heard the knock and looked through the peephole before opening the door. He looked nothing like the man who had sat at that lawyer's table 4 months earlier wearing a satisfied grin. His eyes were red and tired. His shirt was wrinkled. The polished confidence he had carried his entire life was completely gone. I opened the door and waited. "You knew," he said. His voice was flat. "Yes," I said. "You knew about the debt the whole time." "Yes. And you let me take it anyway." I looked at him steadily. "You demanded it, Trevor. You prepared the documents. You pressured me in front of witnesses. You told me I owed the family. So I gave you exactly what you asked for." He stared at me for a long moment. I could see him searching for the angle where he was still the wrong person in the story. "You should have warned me," he finally said. "You should have told the truth," I replied quietly. "About the loans. About the signatures. About everything you took from Dad while he was sick and couldn't protect himself." He had no answer for that. He turned and walked back out into the rain without another word. Trevor hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit 3 weeks later. He argued that the inheritance transfer had been signed under duress, and that I had deliberately withheld material information that would have changed his decision at the will reading. He wanted the transfer reversed and the debt legally reassigned away from him. Mr. Atkins represented me. The court proceedings were straightforward. The transfer document Trevor had brought to the will reading was examined carefully. It had been prepared before the meeting, which meant Trevor had planned the confrontation in advance. The witnesses present, including our uncles and Mr. Atkins himself, confirmed that I had been the one pressured into signing, not the other way around. The clause about accepting all company liabilities was written clearly in the document Trevor himself had prepared and brought to the table. He had constructed his own trap. The judge reviewed the complete case file, including the financial investigation records and the evidence surrounding the original loans. The lawsuit was dismissed without hesitation. Trevor's own attorney reportedly told him afterward that pursuing further legal action would only draw additional attention to the fraud investigation that was already underway. He went very quiet after that. The liquidation process began 8 months after Trevor took ownership of Ward Logistics. With the fraud investigation ongoing and creditors unwilling to extend any further patience, Trevor had no viable path forward. He could not sell the company cleanly. He could not pay the debts from personal funds. He could not operate normally with investigators reviewing financial records every other week. The company my father had built over 30 years, through careful decisions and genuine hard work, was formally dissolved. The equipment was sold to cover a portion of the outstanding debt. The warehouse lease was ended early. The staff, many of whom had worked loyally for my father for years, were forced to find new positions elsewhere. Mr. Boateng called me when the final paperwork was signed. He sounded deeply tired. Trevor was left with whatever small amount remained after the partial liquidation settled the loans. It wasn't enough to clear the full debt. The lenders pursued him personally for the remaining balance. His reputation in the local business community was finished entirely. The golden child who was born to run the company had destroyed it completely. All by himself. I started my own consulting firm 6 months after the will reading. The assets my father had carefully set aside gave me a solid foundation to build from. The 3 rental properties generated steady monthly income. The savings bonds matured at healthy rates. I had enough to support myself while I built something new. I named it Ward Advisory Services, a small firm focused on helping family-owned businesses manage their finances and plan for the future. I knew that world better than almost anyone. I had lived inside it for years without any credit or recognition. My first clients came through word of mouth. Then referrals followed. Within a year I had a small team working alongside me and a client list that kept growing steadily. I moved into a new apartment in a neighborhood I had always liked but never felt I could afford before. I bought a houseplant and learned how to keep it alive, which felt like a small but genuinely meaningful personal victory. I stopped waiting for my mother to call. I stopped hoping for an apology that was never going to arrive. I made peace with the fact that some families reward loyalty and some families punish it. I had finally chosen something better. A year after my father's funeral, I drove to the cemetery on a Sunday afternoon. It was a cool, clear day, the kind my father always liked best. He used to say that overcast skies were the universe being lazy. I stood at his grave for a long time without saying anything. I thought about the Tuesday evening I had sat at his office desk and found those loan documents spread out under the lamplight. I thought about the look on his face when I placed the papers in front of him in his armchair. I thought about the quiet weeks we had spent together in Mr. Atkins' office, carefully rebuilding everything piece by piece. I thought about the way Dad had looked at me across that table and said the words that changed my life. Let him have it. He had trusted me to hold everything together long enough for the truth to come out. And I had. I pressed my hand gently against the stone. You were right, I said quietly. Trevor got the business. He got the inheritance. He got every single thing he had demanded that morning in the lawyer's office with his arms crossed and his mother nodding beside him. He got every consequence too. And me? I got the one thing my father always said mattered most. I finally got to walk away free.